Hey friends, welcome back to Midweek and happy February to you. That's right, we are here and we've made it. And if you've been with us, you know that we are in a series called More Than Miracles, where we're looking at the Gospel of John and just watching how he stacks up these miracles that Jesus performed to show the spiritual undertone that goes with it to help us in our walk in discipleship as we carry on our relationship with Jesus. And so let's not wait any further. If you've got your Bible, go ahead and grab it and turn to John chapter 5. This is the third miracle that he records, and here's what it says. It says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and the Jews went up to Jerusalem. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. And in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, paralyzed. And one of them was there who had been invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him laying there, he knew that he had already been there a long time. And so he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" And the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool. And when the pool is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me." And Jesus says to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And once the man was healed, he took up his bed, and he walked. Now that day was the Sabbath, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" And they asked him, "Well, who is this man who said this to you? Take up your bed and walk." And now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus withdrawn. And as the crowd in this place, or Jesus withdrawn as there was a crowd in this place. And afterwards, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." And the man went away and told them, the Jews, that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now. I am working." And so we were going to get through that. That was a lot to read, as you could tell. I struggled through some of it, but we got through it. So what does this mean? Why is this story so impactful, not just for the man himself and the people that are around, but for us today? Well, let's unpack this. First, let's talk about the pool. Okay, there were some archaeological discoveries that actually went to this location to find that these roofed colonnades were legit. And so exactly how John describes it was found many, many, many years later, and confirming the fact that the historical context that is written in the Gospels substantiates the claim. This is huge. When archaeology and the discoveries that take place help build upon what the Bible speaks on, it just adds this historical context that gives validity to what we're reading. Because let's be honest, sometimes the Bible shares some stories that just are hard to believe, especially one like this, right? And so this pool, and the fact that archaeology has almost verbatim the way that John describes it, is how they found it as well. But this pool is significant. As John highlights here, it's next to the sheep gate, which is telling us that this is close to where they would come for temple sacrifices. And so these people that are over here are just kind of the ones that are kind of forgotten about within the culture. They're the social throwaways, if you want to call them that. And so I just find it ironic that they are close to a place where this pool is at, which is also a place that is close to a sacrificial area for temple purification and cleansing. And so I find it just kind of ironic, as that is a little bit of a historical nid for you. But as we move through the pool, let's now talk about why this is important, because what they believed, whether it's fact or fiction, we don't really know, but what they believed, it impacted how they responded. And what they believed was this, is that an angel would come down from heaven and that they would stir up the water. Now, we don't know if there was something underneath the well, something that would, like a spring, that would cause the water to ripple like that. But every so often, the water would just kind of stir up. And so they had this belief, this assumption, that an angel would come down from heaven and just stir up the water. And so that started to build into the pattern of their behavior. And they believed, whether again through fact or fiction, that whoever got into the water first would be automatically healed of whatever ails them. So if you were paralyzed, if you were blind, if you were deaf, whatever it may be that you needed healing for, you could be the first to jump in this pool once the water started to well up and hopefully be healed. And so that's what these people were there for. And so there must have been a variety of them there, because as Jesus is speaking to this man, Jesus asked him, hey, do you even want to be well? And he goes, well, of course I do. But as you see, like anytime I have an inkling to even move closer to the water, I'm getting trampled over. I'm getting run across. And what it's done, what this pool has done, was it has built competition within the lame. It has made this idea of being healed and being whole a desperate competition for life. And so all these people were just kind of rushing to the water. That's just how this took place. And that's why this pool was there. And so now let's talk about the man. The man claims that he has been invalid for 38 years. I mean, this guy's been struggling with whatever is ailing him for 38 years. But this is where John starts to pivot to the spiritual connection, because if you know your Bible's history, you could go all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 14, and you're going to see very similar language here as a result of Israel's lack of faith in who God is. Not so much a lack of faith, maybe a lack of trusting who God is. And because of their lack of trust, they were wandering around for how long? 38 years. This is Deuteronomy 2:14. And so you can't help but know who John is, how John is, that he's not trying to associate the disbelief and the distrust from ancient Israel to this very moment today. And so for 38 years, this man has been helpless. This man has been struggling with a long-term illness. And this also represented something that was an ancient Near Eastern belief, is that if you suffered for a long period of time, specifically 38 years, this oftentimes was a result of maybe your sin. And if it wasn't your sin, maybe this is God casting his judgment onto you. And regardless of the circumstances, this would bring heavy shame, not just to you, but to your entire household and beyond, your extended family even. And so you oftentimes would go hide away from them so that you would save your family from all of the shame that comes with your illness, which is also why these guys are kind of crowding outside of the gate next to the sheep gate where this pool is, to isolate themselves away from the community, but to also find hope in the water that maybe they can get there when the angel begins to stir this up. So this is a big issue. And as Jesus is sitting here talking to him, he says, hey, do you even want to be well? Now, this is a masterful question that Jesus asked him, because here's what happens for us today. And even then, is sometimes when we get hit with life, when circumstances just kind of go crazy and we can't even make sense of it all, we end up becoming identified by our condition rather than stepping in and trusting who Jesus says that we are, right? I mean, have you been there? I know I have. I've been through quite a bit in my 38 years of living. There's a connection I didn't even realize happening. But yeah, even in my 38 years of living, I've walked through a lot of areas of life where I wanted to sit back and be a victim. And honestly, sometimes it just feels better to do that, to just take a step back, to find and sulk in a moment for a temporary period. Don't make it permanent, because what happens is if you don't figure out a way out, if you don't come up with a game plan to change it, you all of a sudden become defined by it. And then all of a sudden, instead of being who you are and what you do, you've become what illness you have. Hi, my name's Brandon and I've got cancer. Or hi, my name's Brandon and I've got this. And you allow that to become your identity. And this is where Jesus is stepping into this man's moment. And he's saying, don't let this circumstance define who you are, because how God sees you, how I see you, is radically different. You still have a life of purpose. And this is huge. But notice, as soon as this miracle takes place, there are people lurking in the shadows. And rather than celebrating the victory of this man being healed, they want to sit there and pass judgment on the day he was healed. Notice what happens. So Jesus tells him, gives him the command, hey, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And as soon as he does, he gets compromised by these Jewish people who sit there and pass judgment on him because he is carrying a mat on the Sabbath, which is forbidden because they look at that as a form of work. And so for the Jewish community, you did not work on the Sabbath, period. And so they sit there and they go, well, who told you to do this? And he says, the man who healed me. And they go, well, who's that? He goes, I don't know, but he told me to pick up my mat and walk, and I figured this guy's got a little bit more power than you do, so I'm going to listen. And then he finds Jesus a little bit later. Jesus finds him, and then he gives him his name. Hey, my name's Jesus. And then he goes back and rats Jesus out. Jesus probably knew that was going to happen. But here's the point that I want to make, and here's what I think John is trying to do, and how this connects to our spiritual journey, is that eventually the miracle moves from amazement to conflict. And this is kind of the story of the gospel, isn't it? Like whenever we start to get to that point where we're trying to reach somebody, maybe we are confessing who Jesus is in our life, and we're starting to talk about our story, there's going to be a lot of naysayers that get involved. There's going to be a lot of people who cast doubt on your testimony. There's going to be people who are really just struggling to understand the points that you're trying to make and how you can connect it to God. And maybe your story just seems so far-fetched and so unreal that nobody would ever believe what God has done in your life. And so rather than celebrating what God has done, they would rather sit behind you and poke fun at it. They would rather sit there and cast doubt on it or discredit you to the people around you. But this is the point that John is making, is that eventually your story is going to take the gospel from the amazement side to an area of conflict. And that's where your character really gets challenged. And so, friends, I don't know where you are in your walk right now, and I don't know where you are in your testimony with God, and whether you're at the beginning stages where all the amazement's taking place and you're just kind of tiptoeing to Christ and wondering if this is for me or it's not for me, or maybe maybe you're right in the middle of the conflict and you're starting to resort back a little bit because the pressure is just too tough. And maybe you are on the other side where you're challenging people, even like me, to continue on the journey, even through the conflict, because on the other side is a world that is so great, knowing that you have resilience, knowing that you have trust in what God is telling you to do, and you stop looking at the opinions of people and you start living your life for the purpose that God has given you. And regardless of where you are, here's my challenge for you, is that you continue to take one step forward. Whatever that step is, one step forward, one step closer to Jesus, one step deeper in the conflict. Whatever that step is, my prayer for you is that you take it and you own it. If you need to take a step back, even to take a breath, to just see the circumstances that are around you, to evaluate where you are in life, and just simply say, okay, here's my next step forward. Here's how we're going to overcome this. We're going to bring God into the picture, and I'm just going to trust whatever he says, even if it's counterculture, even if it's against what the religion says to do. I'm going to trust what God says in his word, and that's the direction I want to go. And so, friends, we hope that as you continue in your journey of discipleship, that you follow Christ every step of the way, because he will never let you down. Have a great week, friends. We'll see you next time.